Hi, my name is Lauren Castillo. I'm an author and an author-illustrator for some books and an illustrator for other authors for other books.
Welcome to the Picturebooking podcast, a show that celebrates children's books by chatting with those who make them. Whether you're a fan of this medium or a creator, you'll find inspiration and insights here. To make guest suggestions and picture book recommendations, subscribe to the Picturebooking newsletter at picturebooking.com/listen. And now, let's join host Nick Patton inside the Mulva Library Studio on the campus of St. Norbert College for today's talk. Enjoy.
So today we're gonna talk about a book that you illustrated. This is a story. Could you tell us a little bit about this book? And I don't know if you have it with you, if you wanted to read a line or two.
Sure. So this is a story was written by John Schu, and a little bit of a background info on John Schu is he is a former educator and school librarian, and for several years after he left being a elementary school librarian, he was the ambassador for school libraries for Scholastic. And now he is an author, which is pretty awesome. And his books so far are about like the power of story and the power of schools and libraries. So they're very much like, informed from his past jobs. And so this book, This Is a Story, was actually the first book that he wrote. But unfortunately, I wasn't fast enough with the illustrations, so it didn't come out till the second picture book. The first book was called This Is a School, and that was illustrated by Veronica Miller Jameson. So This Is a Story is basically a poem. It's a love letter to libraries and librarians, and our book shows about how it feels the moment that we connect with a book that really touches us in some way. And it shows how those special books can really help grow our hearts and our minds. So it's about the power of story in a short sentence there. And the book starts off, I'll give a little bit of a summary. The book starts off, it's a very sparse poem. It says, "This is a word. This is a word on a page. This is a page in a book." So we're kind of zooming out here. "This is a book on a shelf, waiting." And then the story goes on. It says, "Look at the world. The world is full of humans. Sometimes humans need help connecting." So at this point, what I didn't share yet is the story that's going on in the illustrations, and that's important because John wrote this beautiful sparse poem, but he also left so much for an illustrator to add into the story. And so for me, it was like a dream text, because I could take this sparse poem about connection with books and basically make a whole other storyline about anything I wanted. And so what I did was I ended up choosing a young family, a dad and two siblings who are shown leaving their house in a city, and the young girl is toting around a seahorse kite. And then we see them at the park, and then we see the girl in the park surrounded by other people out in the world there in the city, flying kites and playing and relaxing at the park. And then we see this little girl and her dad and her brother leave the park with she's still toting her seahorse kite, and enter their public library. And when they enter the library, she's dragging the moment in the story where it says, "Sometimes humans need help." We see the little girl with the seahorse kind of dragging behind her, the seahorse kite, and we see her looking into the children's section. And this man holding a big stack of books, which we can assume is the librarian, right? He's kind of looking to put these books back on the shelves, and he notices the little girl with her seahorse kite and her shirt full of fish. And he knows, because he's a librarian and he has superpowers, he knows that this little girl looks a little bit lost in this section of the library, and that she might want to connect with like, a book that he thinks she would really love, and he picks out this book about a seahorse, and I used a real book about a seahorse called Seahorse, the Shyest Fish in the Sea. I used that book to be the book that then he hands off to the girl. And on that spread, the next spread, it says, so the first spread says, sometimes humans need help. And then we see the librarian taking that book, the seahorse book, and handing it over to the girl, and it says connecting. And so she's very excited because obviously this is a subject she's passionate about or wants to learn more about. And so so this is the first example of where in the story where we see a child connecting with this story. And then the book goes on to show other ways in which children in the library are connecting with different types of stories. The thing that I brought full circle in the illustrations is that after she has seen how you can connect somebody with the book, and she's really fallen in love with the seahorse book, she does the same for her younger brother at the end. She's able to she knows that her younger brother, he's carrying his stuffy, which is a cat, and so she goes and finds a book about a cat and hands it to her brother and sits with him to enjoy that story about the cat. So it's kind of like how we can inspire readers to share their passion of reading with others and kind of like pass it on mentality. So anyway, that was very long-winded.
I love it. I love it. It's a
Yes.
great explanation and great introduction to the story about stories.
Yes, the story about stories.
So just to take me back to when you first received this manuscript, how did the story come to you, and then why did you want to illustrate it?
Yeah, well, like I said, the text was so beautiful and spare, and I'm really drawn to kind of what I can add between the lines in a story. And he didn't leave, John Schu, the author, he didn't add any illustration notes. It was completely wide open. And so it just got my mind going, and it got me inspired to kind of think of a storyline to add that kind of pulls everything together, like an individual storyline. And that's when I came up with the young family that travels to their local library. And at first it wasn't a seahorse kite, it was a balloon, and I had a different book in mind. But it ended up morphing through sketches into, I was thinking about, I don't know if I saw somebody out flying a kite, but I was thinking about when I was young, going to the shore in North Carolina and seeing all of these like wild kites being flown. And I thought it would be kind of funny and more interesting than a balloon, maybe to show like, an animal kite, and then like tie that to a specific book. And I had remembered seeing the book, The Shyest Fish in the Sea, Seahorse, the Shyest Fish in the Sea, by Chris Butterworth. I had remembered that book, and I thought that would be a fun book to portray in the artwork. So yeah, like I think for me, when I receive a manuscript to potentially illustrate, if I read it and I don't immediately have like imagery in my head, it's usually a good sign that it might not be like the perfect fit for me. But in this case, it really spoke to me, and I had all of these ideas at once, and so that was a good sign that I should take it on as an illustration job, for sure.
Yeah. So when you read the manuscript, you're like right away you start thinking about, did that girl pop in your head? Did that family pop in your head right away, or did you have to? Was there like was how did you develop that? Did that come? Was it instantly, or was it like something that you had to work your way through to figure out who these characters were and the world that they lived in?
Yeah, I can remember sitting outside on my back patio, reading it for the first time, and then I think I was just there like with the printed out manuscript, which was like one page long, right? Like, short sparse text. And I remember running upstairs to get a pencil, and I started then drawing kind of little thumbnails on the side of the manuscript, because that the girl and her family did kind of come to mind right away. I was like, oh, I can show this from like this young family's point of view. It can be like this one main character. And so it did kind of, all kind of, at least the initial idea, like, it took some time for me to flesh everything out, but the initial idea of one child having that connection in the library was pretty immediate for me.
And so, did you make John a character in the story? Is that right?
Yes. So John Schu is the librarian who's portrayed in the story. Yeah, I mean, it had to be John Schu, right? He's a former librarian, and this is his story, and so yeah, I kind of surprised him with that, and everybody that knows John Schu, when they see the book, know that's who that is supposed to be. So it's the plaid shirt and the blonde hair and like the rosy cheeks.
So he did. When did he find out? When you were doing when he seen sketches, or when did it hit him that he was actually in his book?
Yes, I had submitted a sketch dummy, an early sketch dummy, and through my publisher, because John Schu and I are friends, and it was funny because we did not work directly during this process. We worked through our publisher, so it was so hard not to want to shoot him an email or text him or send him pictures, right? So I sent my sketch dummy through the Candlewick, our publisher, and then they sent it to John. And so we did it the very traditional way, where they then shared the illustrations with the author, and he got to comment on what I had done and give suggestions and things like that. Yeah, I think that's the first time that he saw that. I don't know if he knew immediately or if I had to tell him. He probably had an inkling that, because my sketches are pretty rough, but he probably had an inkling that I was going to draw him as the librarian. So
That's
yeah.
so fun. That's so fun. So just tell me. I like to ask a process question for and it could be about this book or just in general how you work. But I mean, what's your process like creating illustrations for a book like this? I mean, you talked about like doing these, like getting the manuscript and starting to sketch right away in the margins. What does it look like from that point to the finished artwork?
Sure. Yeah, several steps. So it starts out with those scribbles in the margins of almost most manuscripts, even mine. Even if I'm the author and the illustrator, I'll print out, because I began my career as an illustrator, and I wasn't writing. I was used to getting those printed, those emailed manuscripts, and printing them out and kind of scribbling on the sides and on the margins there. And so I do the same thing if I'm writing too. I will wait till the manuscript is pretty fleshed out, and then I will kind of put on my illustrator hat and work as the illustrator. So I kind of keep myself separate in a way. And so how it looks is basically starts with these scribbles. Then I break out my sketchbook, and I start to do thumbnail sketches. So kind of laying out what each page is going to look like, what each spread's going to look like in the book. And that's just very basic scribbles that maybe, the average person looking at it's not really going to know what that is. Like, it's just kind of clear to me, that this is a person over here, and it's kind of figuring out the composition of the spread, and then also what lines of text are going to be on what page. So kind of the pacing of the story. And from there, I will enlarge those little thumbnail drawings, and I'll start to refine the drawings. I'll start to gather photo reference. For example, in This Is a Story, there was a lot of library scenes. So I went to my local library and I took photos of the different areas. I even the shelf where the nonfiction books about sea animals would be, because the book that the little girl selects is a nonfiction title, right? So so I took a kind of a photograph of the shelf there, and so I'm collecting reference so that I can go ahead and make these drawings nicer and cleaner and more finished. And then what I do is I scan those, and then what I did for This Is a Story is I actually I had done a lot of transferring work, more like a printmaking technique in the past, where I would transfer my drawings with like an acetone solvent, and that isn't the best to use. And so I stopped doing that. And something that I've been doing for my last few books is I actually print out the final ink line drawings on a watercolor paper with my waterproof ink printer. So it's basically like one big coloring page then, because the drawing is complete. And then I will take it to my desk, and I use, with this book, This Is a Story, I used watercolor and soft pastels to do the coloring for the book. So yeah, each piece, I do, like, I would say 1 to 2 images a week when I have solid chunks of time. So it's a bit of a long process for me. I know some illustrators work a lot faster, but that's kind of what my process has been for the past 5 or so years.
Well,
So.
that's so interesting. So like when you're scanning it in the computer, that's the place where you're trying to figure out where that text goes. Are you working with the art director then, or how much space you need for text, or how does that work?
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't mention that part. So what happens is when I finish those little thumbnails in my sketchbook that kind of show the composition and where I'm going to place the text, what I end up doing is I actually scan those sketches and I take it into a program called InDesign, and I kind of do like a rough layout. And you can do this by hand too. You don't need a program per se, but I've been using InDesign for a while, and I pretty basically, like, I'll just plop in the text, plop in the sketch, and then I put together basically a PDF to send over as the book dummy. And then from there, they'll take my sketches. Well, we'll go back and forth, and I'll change some sketches maybe, or I'll refine some things, and then the designer will go ahead and lay the text in properly and use like the proper font and everything. And so I'll work from her final design to do the final artwork. So yeah, sorry about that. I forgot that step in the process. So
That's awesome. So then when you print that off, it's all set, it's all been approved, you know where everything is, and then you can just worry about getting the finish is all set for you.
exactly, yeah.
Huh,
And that's
I
the
love
fun
it.
part, right? When everything's approved, and then you can just work on the final art and kind of, for me, I hole up for a couple months if I can, and spend most days in my studio working. So yeah, it's fun listening to podcasts like yours, listening to music, and just doing, like, some days are drawing days and other days are painting and coloring days. So just depends on where I'm at in the process.
And you split it up like that where you don't where we are you working on one are you working on basically one book at a time, or you have several books at different stages where you would do some drawing in the morning or painting in the afternoon, or is it just like this is a drawing day, this is a painting day?
Yeah, well, I'm not very good at juggling multiple book projects. So I like to sometimes, if I'm working on writing for a story, I'll be doing that while I'm doing artwork for another project, and that's a good balance for me. But often, like, there hasn't been a time where I've worked on illustrating 2 books at the same time. Like, I'll just do one before the other. It's easier for my brain to like, because once I get absorbed in a project, I just want to be all in on that specific project. So, and it's nice for me to be able to switch back and forth between, like, say, one week I'm doing 2 or 3 final drawings, and then I can switch gears, and the following week I'm doing the final paintings for those 3 drawings. Like, I've printed out the line work, and I'm at my desk just painting for that whole week. So it kind of, changes things up a little bit, so the days aren't the same.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah, makes it more interesting.
So your illustrations, I mean, the word that I hear a lot and the word that I feel is nostalgic. There's just like a quality to them that is always warm and inviting.
Thank you.
And I just can you discuss, your inspiration for kind of the way you work and the way it finishes, and the sort of the style of it, and and how you think you achieved it.
I think, thank you. That's very kind. I think that a lot, I get inspiration from a lot of books from my childhood and books that were printed in like the 60s and the 70s. So maybe that kind of contributes. That's just the type of illustration that I gravitate to. Those maybe like more classic, I don't know, I'm thinking like Maurice Sendak is one of my illustration heroes. Uri Shulevitz, um, then like Barbara McClintock, who's, does gorgeous work. Yeah, I guess it's just the type of illustration that I'm attracted to, and that's kind of what informed my style a little bit as time went on. I think that must be what it is. I don't really know. It just kind of came out that way. I feel like I know early on, my first book I started working on in 2005. And a lot of people say that like even those older books where I feel like my work was a bit more naive and like, I've come along, at least in my own eyes, I've come a long way. People still say that like they definitely feel like my work has that signature style, that like the work that I did back early on is still like, very similar to the work I did do today. And I don't see it that way, but I guess, the thread is continuous. So yeah.
Well, that's the sign of, yeah. Well, that's yeah. When someone says, "Well, that it looks like something that you've done," and you're like, "Well, yeah, I don't know what that means," but
Right. Right.
that's I think that's a good sign for an artist that how this is how you think and this is how you create, and even when you're getting better, you're still who you are. Um,
Right.
yeah, something special.
Well, sometimes I wish that I had like, because I think over the years, obviously, as you do something more and more, you get, you get better at it. And so with drawing, sometimes I look back to older drawings and even like sketchbooks, and I'm like, oh, that was like wasn't accurate, but it had so much energy in it, like, sometimes I wish I could take back that like, kind of naive style of drawing that I had. Yeah. It's
Oh,
unfortunate when you learn to draw better, you lose something. So
yeah, I think yeah, I think that way with creativity all the time. I'm like, could I just get out of my when I'm making something? Could I get back to that place? And you can get there sometimes if it's the room is dark enough and you're alone and it's quiet enough where and the world is completely outside. Where it's back when you were a kid, when you could just fall right into that world instantly and just go and just make and not worry about everything else, and
mhm.
just be creative. Oh, I love that, and that's why I mean that's the energy that brings is amazing, and you just you have some days you just have to fight for it so hard, um,
Yeah, it's true.
but yeah, yeah, to get back there and not to worry about everything that you've learned. It
Exactly.
just
Yeah, more the feeling, right?
more the feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I got a general question. Since we're talking about a story about stories, why do you think stories are important? Why are they important to you, and why are they important to share with children?
I think, well, stories connect us. So, um, sharing story, whether it's in book form or, any type of media, movies, television, um, verbal stories from family members, like they bring connection and they bring about they make us more compassionate. They, grow our minds, grow our hearts. Let us think outside of our own points of view. And yeah, I think people that read more, I think are more open to possibilities and to other people that aren't like them, that didn't um grow up the same as them. And I think that learning through story is really important for humanity.
What makes this book, this is a story, relevant and essential for readers today. And I feel like, maybe that's it, that connecting, that understanding, that expanding, um,
Right. Yeah,
is,
and I think our book too, I go to schools and speak with kids a lot during the school year. And I think what's been cool being able to share this book, This Is a Story, it kind of gets the conversation going about like um talking with kids about like what books are like, fueling you. Like what's a book that like, if you look at the cover of This Is a Story, the little girl, the main character, she's hugging a book, the seahorse book, close to her chest. And she's like, has her eyes closed and her head thrown back. And so like just the idea of like, what's a book that you've read recently that puts you in that place, like that makes you feel, or made you learn something that you want to share with somebody else, or what's a book that you connected with in a strong way like that. And I think it's cool because it gets the conversation going with students about what books they're loving and what books they can share with me. And like, when I go to schools, I love to ask the kids, even before making this book, like, what are you reading now? Like, what should I be reading now? And give me some tips. And they do. They give me their lists. So and it's just a cool way that we're connecting and sharing. And like, I have slides that I show some of my childhood favorite books, and whenever I get to those slides, a bunch of screams often come out, because like at least several of the kids in the room have read one or two of those books and are excited that they also connected with that book and they love that book, now or when they were younger. So yeah, connection and discussing our reading lives and sharing with each other and getting excited about literacy. So
yeah, it's so fun. So, well, you've got this book that is about finding the perfect book. So, how fun was it to find the perfect books to fill this library that you created with? I mean, how did you,
yeah.
and like you said, use it like the book on the cover, the main book that the girl loves is a real book. To just talk about the decision to make it a real book, and then then how you decided what books were included inside this thing, which is it's so fun just to like, oh, I know that one. I know, is that I should look that up. I don't, it's it's a fun little game to play of how
It
many
is.
books can you spot in this book?
It is. It's like a seek and find, right? Yeah, I was hoping you would ask me this question, because adding books that I love, and I knew that John Schu, because as I said, we're friends, and also anybody that follows him on Twitter knows the books that he's loving or that he loves and is passionate about. So adding these real books into the art was such a joy. Um, Now it took a little bit of extra work because there was like a permission situation involved, where I had to reach out to the publishers and the authors and illustrators and basically get approval to add these books into the artwork, even though I was drawing them. The fact that the covers were being represented in the book, we wanted to make sure that it was, okay. So there was some extra work. Like I said, I was kind of had my legal hat on for a little while during that part of the process, but it was well worth it, because I think that it's been so fun to see people opening up the book and and finding different titles, especially educators, like, oh my gosh, like these are books that I read. I did a read aloud with my students for with this book, and yeah, and like our kids love this book here, and like so it's been really fun to have that additional layer in the artwork. I'm glad that like we took the time to make that happen, Candlewick included, because they had a lot of extra work on their hands during that part too. Because if you look at if you do get a copy of the book and look at the very last page, it's the copyright page and it lists all of the titles. And I think there were around 50 books that appear in within the pages. And so books like The One and Only Ivan, let's see, Mango, Abuela and Me by Meg Medina and illustrated by Angela Dominguez, Leaves by David Ezra Stein. Let's see what else we've got. Windows by Julia Dinos, and The Wild Robot by Peter Brown, and the list goes on and on. But like I said, for some of the prominent spreads where there's some close-ups of kids reading, and also the poster that's on the back of the jacket, where it's kind of a close-up of kids reading, like I was pretty intentional about the titles I wanted to show there. They were books that I knew that John Schu book talks when he does school visits, and either and or authors that he really loves, like Flora and Ulysses, Kate DiCamillo, for example. So yeah, I was pretty intentional about like what books would go where within the story, and which books were more visible and that sort of thing. So it was fun. It was a lot of fun. So yeah, and it's been cool to watch kids flip through the pages and see those and get excited.
And was that the best thing about doing this book, or what was, like I said, I'll ask this, what was the best thing about making or sharing the story?
Yeah, I mean, that was definitely fun because I do have a lot of friends who are authors and illustrators. So just being able to kind of give a nod to them and their beautiful book within the illustrations was cool. But I have to say also, like, I mean, just being able to illustrate one of John Schu's first books was really great. And I mean, he's a wonderful guy and advocate of literature, and it was just it was just really special to be able to get to do that. And the fact that he knows picture books so well, and feel like he knew to leave that space for the illustrator. He didn't know that it was going to be me illustrating it, like, and he didn't say I want the illustrator to have this like this side story going on, or I want this to happen on this page. Like he trusted whoever the illustrator would be, they would do their job, and like they would bring their own kind of piece of and story to the project. And I think that was so fun that I was given that leeway to be able to create that kind of side story that I feel like added to it, and we really complemented each other, like my art and his text. And I think those to me are some of the best collaborations, is when the illustrators are given that space, and when there's this perfect balance. And I feel like yeah, that was given to me by John in his writing, so I feel really grateful for that. And I think that was the overall icing on the cake, I think, because that it was just like the perfect text to illustrate.
That's so fun. So how did this all start for you? How did this begin, this journey into children's literature? How did it where did it start for you?
Yeah, well, in high school, my high school art teacher was an illustrator, and that was the first illustrator that I had ever met. And he was really encouraging, and he knew how much I loved art in general. He knew that I was really into drawing and illustration too, because he was teaching us illustration along with a lot of other foundation type classes. And he encouraged me to apply to art school, and he let me know that like illustration could be an actual career. He was a teacher, and he was a more of a gallery illustrator, so his work hung on walls. It was more like piece by piece, not narrative, in a book sense. And so yeah, he just encouraged me and helped me put together a portfolio to go to art school. And so when I went to Maryland Institute, I went to Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore, and then I think my second or third year took a picture book class. And that was when I fell in love, because at first I knew I wanted to do something in illustration, but I didn't know what type of illustration that would be. And picture books was just it for me. It was like the format that I loved the most. And I had held on to all my childhood books, and I loved the objects, picture books as objects. And so yeah, once I took that class, I think, I knew for sure that that was the path that I wanted to try to get on. So yeah, I think by college, that was when I really knew. And then I went to graduate school specifically targeted in visual journalism. It was at School of Visual Arts in New York. And while I was there, I was kind of strategic about going to the school in New York City because I knew all the publishers were there. And so it just so happened that about 4 other students in my class, our class was only about 20 students, but there were about 5 of us that were really interested in publishing and in children's books. And so we would band together and take our portfolios. And at the time, this was the early 2000s, you could drop off your portfolios at the publishing houses, and the art directors or editors, they would look at the work and then they would send you back a note, or they would keep your promo materials, and, and maybe say like, oh, they would either give you constructive criticism, or they would say, we're going to keep your illustrations on file, and maybe someday we'll have a manuscript that works for you. And so it was just about persistence, and I just got really lucky. I feel fortunate. We had a lot of visiting critiques, like either from publishing or from newspapers, and like different types of illustration. They would come in and they would look at our artwork in graduate school. And I just happened to have the opportunity to have Frances Foster, who was an editor at Forrest, Strauss and Giroux. She came in and she looked at all of our work, and she, I guess, connected with my artwork, and she kept my samples. And then I graduated in 2005 in the May. And then that summer she reached out and said that she had a manuscript that she thought might work for me. And I was just kind of blown away. Like, I wasn't expecting to get my dream project so soon, but it was like the perfect project too. The book was called What Happens on Wednesdays, and it was about a little girl in her Brooklyn neighborhood. And I lived in Brooklyn. I did a lot of location drawing. Like, I would go out and draw the streets of Brooklyn and draw, like, the neighborhoods and stuff. And so, like, obviously the editor knew that this was something that I was really passionate about. And so it just worked out that the subject matter of the illustrations were going to be, aligned with what I did, probably what I did best, So yeah, I get this dream manuscript and got to illustrate it. And then she kept hiring me, like, offering me new manuscripts. And so I worked with her until her last days of publishing. So, because she was an older, more established editor. So yeah, I was very fortunate. And I know that the publishing world is a little bit different these days in the way that you go about promoting yourself. But yeah, for the time that I was in New York, I was in the right place at the right time, I guess.
Yeah.
So
Well, it's
yeah,
still about making those connections and having your work
yeah,
connect with somebody else. That's always going to
absolutely.
be there.
Maybe more on, like, on Instagram and Twitter these days, but still, I'm sure there's still people that do mail-ins, mail-in postcards, and yeah. I would say the biggest change that I've noticed is that most authors and illustrators need agents these days. And I know when I first started, that wasn't the case, but it's definitely helpful to have an agent. So it's not the worst thing that things have moved in that direction.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
when you're in high school there and you first started dreaming about being an illustrator, or even when you first started dreaming about being an illustrator for picture books, what did you think the job would look like? And now that you're now that you're here and you're established, what is it like? Is it everything that you thought it was? Is there things that are different about it?
That's
Um,
a great question. Oh, I'm trying to think back to those years. I don't think I thought anything about the business side when I was young, even in college. Early, like in my undergraduate college, as an illustration major, we didn't learn too much about the business side and how, you're essentially running your own business, and you're not going to be sitting around drawing every day. You're going to be answering emails. You're going to be, uh, doing all sorts of, kind of budgeting, finances, trying to, just a lot of these small things that I just didn't think about when I was younger. But of course, those days that I probably imagined when I was 20 are there. They're just not every day, like I kind of make sure that if I have a lot of, you know, um, emails and not so pleasant like tasks for me to do, that I balance that by having a day where I'm just completely like immersed in drawing or immersed in painting or something like that. So like, it kind of gives me a reward for the tasks that none of us love to do. Yeah, so I think that would be my answer, is that just, you know you're so focused, at least I was so focused on, like, getting one day that book deal, and like I'm just gonna sit and draw all day long, all year long, and like, you don't think about those other little things that go into the job. But yeah, I mean, it's all worth it when you have those days where you get to do like the dream part of the job.
so what's coming up? What projects are you working on now? What's
Yeah.
around the corner?
I'm excited to talk about this. I just finished artwork for a follow-up to my book Nana in the City. So Nana in the City is a story that was actually based on a childhood memory about visiting my Nana in New York City when I was young, and about the child in the story is really like uneasy about big city life, and like Nana takes him around and shows him how wonderful the city can be. So it's like a love letter to the city, but also like, a relationship story between grandparent and grandchild. And so that book came out in 2014, and I was actually fortunate enough to win a Caldecott Honor for that book in 2015. And so a lot of years have gone by, but I wanted to return to the character of Nana, and do a companion story called Nana in the Country, where the little boy lives in the country and Nana is coming to visit him and stay with him for the weekend while his parents are gone. And so this is a story about how he's prepared for Nana to come to the country and show her, how wonderful the country is. And he's got all these things planned that he thinks Nana has never done before, and he wants to show her the ropes, basically. And he's kind of surprised that Nana knows more than he thought she did about the country. But it's another like relationship story about those two characters, and this time taking place in the country. And because I live in central Pennsylvania right now, I got to draw from the inspiration of Lancaster County and like all the beautiful countryside around here, for the illustrations in that book. So that one comes out next March 2024. So it'll be 10 years after the release of the first book, believe it or not. But yeah, I'm really excited to be able to share that with readers next year.
That's awesome. That's awesome. My final question today is what's been the best moment of your picture book life?
Ooh, well, I mentioned the Caldecott Honor. I mean, personally, like that was such a surprise, and such a an honor to to be awarded, for my work in that way. But then I think the true reward came after winning that honor. Like it was fairly early in my career, and I wasn't doing much at all in the way of school visits and visiting libraries and, meeting with children. I was really like, at that point, I had been mostly spending my time in my studio working on book after book. And when Nana in the Country was awarded the Caldecott Honor, I became, all of a sudden I got requests like to come to schools and share about my books and just share about books and talk books with students. And I think that's been the most joy for me, is really being able, because of that award, I think it just brought more notice to my work. And then then I had these opportunities that I didn't have before. So I've been doing a lot of visiting schools and libraries, and I think that that's the most rewarding part. Like, most of our jobs are, as authors and illustrators, are pretty isolating, because we're creating and we're making these books, and then when we finally finish them and get to go out into the world and share the stories with the students, with readers, I think that's really rewarding to actually, like, that's what they're for. They're to share with, and to hear the feedback from students, and to see how they're connecting with your stories is really rewarding. So I think that's by far the most the best part of making books for me.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed the show, there are a few ways to help Picturebooking out and shape what this show is. You can subscribe and rate the podcast on whatever player you are listening to right now, and send this episode to your book friends. Have you read a fantastic book lately, or have a creator in mind that we need to have on? Subscribe to the Picturebooking newsletter at picturebooking.com/listen. And we'll let you know when we are ready to book future episodes.